on the panel. I know, Chris, you have your sign up.
Thank you, Dr. Barcy. Brady, good morning. Thank you for being here today. You know I have several questions. One of those being, I'm looking at ATSDR's list of conditions that they issued strong evidence for causation. And in going through all of that, every single one of those conditions is now presumptive or will be soon at the VA, except for one. Now, I know a veteran cannot be born with a congenital heart defect, but ATSDR, it's pretty much established science that congenital heart defects were caused by exposure to the water at the base. However, no single child that was born with a congenital heart defect at the base is eligible for the family member program. Of all that science, explain to me why.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for your question. And thank you for being such a strong advocate for the families in this regard. Chris and I were speaking a little bit earlier, and so I'm very glad that you had a chance to ask your question in public. Allow me to speak broadly and then focus down directly on your question here. Veterans of all cohorts are concerned about the effects on their families, these intergenerational or multi-generational effects, or effects that would have occurred directly to family members. And to that end, Veterans Affairs is working very hard right now with other federal agencies and with the national academies to try and develop a roadmap, a research framework, which will allow us to more effectively look at those issues. I will tell you that the Veterans Affairs has entered into 2 new contracts with the national academies, one for the next Agent Orange study, which will have a major chapter on multi-generational effects. Also, the next Gulf War and Health study is, in fact, almost nearly entirely dedicated to multi-generational effects. You say, well, what does this have to do with this issue right here? And the connection is that the science, the laboratory science, the new technologies, et cetera, are mentioned quite a bit. Most of us will hear words like epigenetics and talking about DNA, et cetera, and yet it's not always clear exactly what is the application and how do you trace what would be an effect on a developing child, whether it be a direct exposure in utero while the mother's pregnant, or an effect that would occur that would be handed down in the genes. And in fact, the National Academies is going to give us what we've asked for, we hope, within 2 years. That will be a framework, a research framework, a roadmap, which will enable us to designate which part of the federal government, I suspect it will be the National Institutes of Health, will actually have the lead for nailing this down, because they, of course, do genetics work, et cetera. But what would those studies look like? How long would they take? What technologies would they apply? And so that's one thing. So I want you to know, VA, we're on the case. We're working the issue broadly because that's a big issue for all veteran cohorts. Now, specifically for Camp LeJeune and for Camp LeJeune family members, the current authorities given to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs are limited to veterans. The current authorities are limited to veterans unless Congress provides some other additional authority. So Brady was just talking about one authority under the 2012 law that allows Veterans Affairs to be, in essence, an insurance company for family members at Camp LeJeune, okay, a last payer. A very circumscribed, narrow authority that was given to the Secretary. Another very narrow authority that relates to descendants or family members is the spina bifida program for Agent Orange. But that is the limit. Those are the only small areas that the Secretary can currently work in legally, that he's authorized to work in legally. And so the solution to broadening the aperture on the 2012 law to include things such as congenital heart defects for children who would have been at Camp LeJeune, the solution set is to be found with the legislative branch because, again, the Secretary doesn't have that authority. Do we have in the audience any congressional staffers for any members of Congress? Is there anyone here representing? So I know at some of the meetings we sometimes get people that are good resources.
I personally invited Walter Jones,
okay,
who is a congressman for this district, but
Okay.
He's not here.
But that's where the solution set will be. Now, I will tell you that in another week, I and some others will be meeting with some congressional staffers to talk about multi-generational effects. And one particular area is, and I'm really surprised it didn't come up in the questions yet, so I'll throw it out, is dealing with the disconnect between the 15 conditions that are in the 2012 law that include the family members, and now the list of 8 that are in the presumptions. Okay, there's some overlap, there's some difference. Veterans Affairs is not in a position to rectify the disconnect because, again, our Secretary does not have the authority to change what are the benefits for the family members, but Congress can make that change.
So just as a quick clarification, ATSDR has stated that there is a strong causation for congenital heart defects, and especially when we're here in Jacksonville, this is where these babies died. The cemeteries around here are full of Camp LeJeune babies. And there are a lot of living. Myself, I was born at the base. I have a congenital heart defect. And when I talk with other people, and it's very hard to explain that disconnect, saying that, no, there is no help. You will not get assistance with your copayment. There's nothing out there for any child who is born at the base with a congenital heart defect, because why? The science is there. You talked about studies. The studies have been done. What is the VA, specifically Brady, what is your department doing to rectify this situation? You can go to the Secretary and ask for more authority. You can try to get the regulations changed yourself. What is your agency doing to make sure that you're providing care for everybody that was affected at the base?
So just want to correct an error here. Brady certainly could go talk to the Secretary. I could go with him. We could have multiple people in the room with the new Secretary. The Secretary would not have the authority to change the 2012 law.
But he could ask Congress for that authority.
Yes. But everyone in this room can do that as well. You see, that's sort of the message I'm giving everybody here, is that it is an issue. The voice from VA can be one of the voices that raises that as an issue, in the same way that we're raising the disconnect between the list of 15 and the list of 8. But ultimately, the solution set is found in new legislation that will update the 2012 law.
But we can't even get the congressman for this district to show up at this meeting. How are we going to do anything on the legislative side for that?
Yeah.
And, thank you, Chris. And in fairness to, that